Hello and welcome to the Federal. I am Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. Very shortly, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of Independence Day. What happened in 1947 is going to be celebrated with great pomp and show by the government of India. But independence is actually a very hollow word unless we actually get the powers that were actually and the rights which were expected when India became independent. So it becomes very important for us to also take stock of the Constitution and also find out as to how the Constitution has worked over these past 7 decades. It was a bit later that the Constitution was adopted, but I think that this is an appropriate time for us also to take stock of what we call the working of the Indian Constitution. Joining me on this program today is Arghya Sengupta, who has also been the guest editor of a journal which has been brought out by India's premier civil society institution, the India International Center at New Delhi. He is also the founder and research director at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Arghya is an extremely talented legal mind. His areas of specialization are constitution, law, and regulation of the digital economy. He has served on a number of government committees, including the B.N. Sri Krishna-led Committee of Experts on Data Protection Framework. He's also written several very important academic papers in some of the leading law journals of country on the Supreme Court and on the Constitution. So, Arghya, welcome to the program, first of all. And it's a real privilege to have you to speak about the Constitution. I would like to begin by one of my favorite quotes of the Constitution by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, that the Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document. It is a vehicle of life, and its spirit is always the spirit of the age. Now, whenever we talk about Constitution, we talk about words, which are actually much bigger concepts, which relate to individual freedom, expression, association, freedom to lead the life of dignity, liberty, and a right to life, which includes justice and also equality. Now, the Constitution was intended to set the citizens on the path of freedom and a more equal society. After 75 of independence, how much of this has happened and how much of this remains illusory? What is your initial take on this?
So first of all, Nilanjanda, thank you very much for having me at this podcast.
It's a pleasure to have you also.
With the Federal. Your question is a very deep one, and we could spend a very long time just discussing this.
Sure.
But my first point is that that 75 years is a very short time in the life of a nation, and is also a short time in the life of a constitution. I think this is an important point to keep in mind, that the constitution of any country is always a work in progress. Something that I often say is that 77 decades into the history of the United States, after its constitution was enacted, there was a civil war being fought over the question of slavery. Obviously, the constitution had not brought quietus to the issue, which is why there needed to be a civil war. As far as India is concerned, as in there is no civil war, but have we realized our vision of freedom, equality, liberty, and justice that you spoke about? Not at all, right? We are very far from achieving that promise that the Constitution holds out for its citizens. And there are two ways in which we can think about this. The first is that why have we not reached where the Constitution
intended to be?
Yeah. And I think that going back to another quotation by Ambedkar said, ironically, while he was actually moving the draft constitution, that democracy is a topsoil on an Indian soil that is basically undemocratic. Right. So I think why we have not gone as far as perhaps the constitution framers or the freedom fighters might have intended is, number one, because of the fact that our institutions of democracy have not matured in a way in which one would expect. And that is always a reflection on us. If we
Right.
as a
That's right.
society continue to vote on basis of factors that are extraneous to performance or governance, then we will only get as good as we are giving. Right. So
Yeah.
that's number one.
Essentially on lines of identity. That has been the
Essentially on the lines
primary.
of identity. Exactly, on the lines of identity, which is a natural place to start, but I think we haven't moved away from there.
Yes,
And if we
exactly.
have moved away from there, we've moved away into these kind of vacuous slogans like development or anti-corruption. Now, no party can say that they're anti-development. No party
Right.
can say they are pro-corruption. So this is not
Right.
a move away from identity. This is just a move from identity to some kind of slogan. So we genuinely don't have any principled governance based politics, and so I think that's
Right.
that's one very large reason as to why perhaps the vision of the constitution is not the fully realized. But the second way of looking at it, and this is something that I believe in, is that and I've said this in my editorial note also, is that the constitution
That's
is a work in progress, that this is
right.
something that does take time. It's not something that we can expect will happen even in 7 decades. And it is up to us as in to ensure that all our institutions are working in a way that the vision that is laid out by our founders is fulfilled. So my sense is
Right.
that we need to diagnose why it's happened, and we also need to do our bit to ensure that it proceeds apace.
Right. The Constitution is supposed to be a guiding text for the people who are in power, that means the government, the ruling party, and also for the people who are actually voting them year after year. Now, has this actually been the case? Has it actually served like a guiding text? We do hear that political leaders keep talking about the Constitution being the holy text. This was most dramatically announced by the current Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, in 2014, after he was elected as the leader of the BJP parliamentary party on his first visit, and he actually announced that India has only one sacred holy book, and that is the Constitution of India. Various other leaders have also sworn by the Constitution in less evocative terms. So, has it actually been what it was supposed to be? That's something that is to be followed? Or is it only to be kept on the shelf and shown to the people, look, we are following it, but as far as practice is concerned, it is not really followed, and the people also do not demand it?
So I have a slightly contrarian view on this, which is that calling the Constitution a holy book actually, in substance, does it a disservice. The fact is that people can call the Constitution a holy book in terms of making a rhetorical statement, and that's fine. That our holy book is the Constitution and not the Gita or the Quran or the Bible. I think that way it's fine. As in it's a kind of statement that underlines our secular credentials,
True.
and so I have no cavil with that. But the reason I have a little bit of discomfort with this idea of a holy book is that a holy book is not engaged with. A holy book is venerated. A holy book is not debated.
Okay.
A holy book is worshipped. The holy book doesn't say that something could happen in an alternative way. The holy book says right or wrong, right? So I think that this is why, because the Constitution has been treated somewhat like a holy book by citizens of the country, it has
That's
actually become a lawyer's document. It has
okay.
become what Dr. Ambedkar was envisaging, that this is a document that is debated and discussed for sure, but it is debated and discussed by lawyers in the courtroom, and as a result of which there will be a judgment of the Supreme Court. So I think first, I think we need to realize, and I say this with great humility, that the Constitution is not a holy book. The Constitution, I've written an article in the Telegraph today, the Constitution is the book of India. And we must all open the book of India to debate, discuss, and understand what works for us and what doesn't. There may be many parts of the Constitution which we think should not be there, and we should do away with them. So the point is, and which we can't do with a holy book. So one, it's not a holy book. That's a very, very significant point. And I think the second point, if I may just add a little bit onto that, is that has the constitution really checked government and the actions of people? To some degree, yes, right? So if we were to take an example, let's take this, what's happening in Maharashtra, right? Eknath Shinde has
Right.
become chief minister, Uddhav Thackeray is now no longer chief minister. How is this playing out? As in, it is playing out in accordance with some principles in the 10th schedule of the constitution. Now, whether
Right.
it is playing out legally or not is a different issue. But the fact is that there is an overarching framework around which we are operating. So I think that has it performed this function? Somewhat. We can't say that it has been a resounding failure, but we can't say it has been a resounding success.
Yeah. You know, whenever we talk about the Constitution, people do tend to get very poetic about our preamble. But you know, even if we do not want to really become preamble, we have to understand that it is possibly a very important part of our Constitution. Now, there are 5 basic ideas which emerge out of the preamble, which is of absolute necessity in our present times. You know, the first 3 are, of course, you know, what were there in the original preamble, that is sovereign, democratic, and republic. And the other 2, socialist and secular, which were inserted later on in 1976 during emergency, but which were not repealed when the changes in the constitution during, you know, as part of the 42nd constitution amendment was, you know, made. So it remains part of it. So these 5 ideas. Now, if I say that of these 5 ideas, people really do not have any debate or dispute over sovereignty. They do not have any idea that we must continue to be a republic. Socialist has really become a bit of a misnomer. We really do not know that three decades after economic liberalization, whether there is any socialist principle surviving in India. But democracy and secularism, these 2 continue to be very contested subjects and words. Everybody has a different understanding of democracy. Many people would argue that in the last 8 years that there has been a great erosion of democratic principles and values in the country. Likewise for secularism. Every political party presents their secularism as genuine secularism or the real secularism. Nobody in this country, you know, says, just like you said, you know, about corruption, that we support corruption. So nobody says that we are not secular. Even the most blatantly communal forces in this country say we are secularism, but we are secular, but our secularism is the actual secularism. As somebody who understands the constitution, how it was understood by the framers of it, you know, of the book, you know, the fact that secularism was not written in the constitution, but it was very much ingrained in the principles and in the thinking of the constitution. How do you look at the democracy and secularism being very contested issues?
First, I think that as far as secularism is concerned, our founding fathers missed a trick. I can say that the founding fathers should have been more candid and categorical about their ideas of secularism, which are animating the pages of the Constituent Assembly debates, which is an idea of Sarva Dharma Sambhav. Okay, this is the idea of secularism that comes across not as a separation of church and state, a French laïcité kind of idea of secularism. So, but the fact is,
it's a very Indian kind of secularism.
Yes, and they did not spell that out. And I think that this ought to have been done. The way in which secularism was protected in the constitution was by giving every individual the right to freely practice, profess, and propagate their religion. It was done by giving groups or religious groups certain autonomy over running their institutions and temples, and giving minority groups the autonomy to run their educational institutions in whichever way they pleased, and also preserve culture, language, and script. Now, the point is that all this is good, but all this left a very large question open: is what is the meaning of Indian secularism, right? And I think the reason that ought to have been done, which is because this is very interesting, is that the constitution of the Hindustan Free State was a document that was adopted by the Hindu Mahasabha in 1944 or 45. Now, that is an alternative reading of the Constitution. Now, if you read the Fundamental Rights chapter, it was piloted largely by Shama Prasad Mukherjee. If you read the fundamental rights chapter, it's very interesting that it says that India shall be a secular state. And then it goes on to give certain ways in which freedom of all religions will be protected. Okay, so it doesn't
Right,
say the
right.
kind of thing that we are hearing in terms of rhetoric now, right? So we are recording this today when there has been this dispute over namaz being read in the Lulu Mall that has been
Right.
recently opened in Lucknow. So, there is this sense that, we are not all
Or
equal
even,
citizens of.
or even if I may interrupt, that for the last several months there has also been a campaign against Friday namaz in public areas in several
That's right,
parts
and this
of
has been
India.
this
There
has been
has been
very long
a
standing.
debate,
This has been very
Yes.
long standing. I grew up in Calcutta, and I remember when on Fridays, as in there was
Yes,
namaz being read on the street, there were always some murmurs and some protests and so on and so forth. It was a
that's
it was a
right.
kind of long standing issue, but this idea that we are not all equal citizens was not an idea of secularism that even the Hindu Mahasabha shared in 1945. Okay, it was not,
Right.
but our constitution framers did not close this debate. Okay, and this is why I say that the
Okay.
constitution should not be seen as a holy book, because that debate was left open, which is why you have these kinds of contests that are taking place currently over what is the meaning of this. And the fact is, my view on this is very, very clear, is that Indian secularism cannot be a facile European style secularism
No, it
where
cannot.
you don't wear some kinds of clothes in public, and you have this burqa ban. This is completely antagonistic to any form of Indian secularism, and it is time that every right-thinking person realizes that the moment you ban the burqa, it is only a matter of time, though you may not think of it today, that
Hmm.
someone will come down the line and say, "I will ban the cross or the Mangal Sutra." Someone will come down the line and say
That's
this,
right.
okay?
In
Because
fact,
it is
during
the
the
concept.
during the hijab controversy, there was actually an argument that if Hindu girls are allowed to wear various marks or wear clothes, wear the chudi or put a bindi, then why should hijab not be allowed? After all, it is also a matter of displaying identity for the Muslim
Yeah,
girl
absolutely.
students.
And it just feels very distant now, because the kind of where we are in our politics, it doesn't
Yes,
feel like anyone can ever ban the Mangal Sutra. But the fact is that nations last longer than individuals, and politics
true.
changes, and you never, and so you must not concede the principle. So coming back to the point, as an Indian secularism is a secularism that is based on equal respect. Okay.
Right.
And as far as that is concerned, as in over the course of the last 75 years, as in we have a very mixed record on this, because what equal respect has meant sometimes
Hmm.
has been minority appeasement, which has stultified internal
Okay.
reform within religion. So as an example of that, there is an essay in the volume that you mentioned
Yes,
by
it is. Yes.
Moindul Islam, who has talked about the communist government in West Bengal and its championing of secular
How
politics.
reforms within the minority communities was not really encouraged.
Exactly. And so you get on the one side that, and on the other
Hmm.
side, as you get a more open kind of
On the other side,
ideology.
there is also this argument we keep on hearing by from people who are part of this regime in some way or the other, maybe not holding constitutional positions, but those people arguing that this is essentially a country of all Hindus, that we are all Sanatan Dharmis, that even the Muslims who are there at some point or the other, they were also Hindus. So they are our entire culture is Hindu or Sanatan Dharmi. If they want to come back, fine. If they do not want to come back, well, we have about 5 crores devs and devis. So they can be just another part of that, which really makes the minorities, the religious minorities, very insecure, because they feel that their identity as a separate religious community is being trampled upon.
So
That
this is
is
a
the
standard, this is
so
a
now.
standard Savarkarite idea, right? As in the fact is that, as in the
That's
Muslims who
right.
are also, except the ones who have come, as in
So is
are
this
also basically
the
Hindus. Yes.
So is this idea in any way reflected in the constitution, or this is anti-constitutional, such a viewpoint?
No, so as in this, see, the constitution doesn't deal with, that's what I said, the constitution does not deal with what is the meaning of secularism,
Okay,
right? The Supreme
right.
Court has come up with a couple of judgments as a non-secularism, as in which largely say what I've said, but there is also one judgment of the Supreme Court which says that Hindutva is a way of life. Okay, so the fact is that it is completely consonant with the understanding of secularism. But coming to the basic point is that the constitution itself left a large conceptual question of what it means to be secular in India open. Okay, as a result of which, as in certain debates of this kind that you mentioned, are happening.
Now, you had also talked about institutions. The constitution, can work only if the institutions continue to be fairly strong and robust in India. Now, as a constitution, there have been several occasions in the last several years, not just only during the tenure of this government, but also in the past, when institutional integrity has come into question, that it is not surviving as was envisaged by the framers of the constitution. How do you look at this entire issue of institutional integrity and the autonomy of institutions as understood or as specified under the constitution not being maintained?
So first, I don't agree with the fact that the autonomy of institutions has been under threat. Okay, I actually feel that, as you rightly said, as in the autonomy of institutions has been as much under threat in the last 8 years as it has in many periods before.
In the past also.
Yes, because we are largely a personality and person-driven country, and we are not a process or institution-driven country. One. Number two, as Rajendra Prasad had said in the Constituent Assembly, that the constitution is only as good as the people who run it, right?
That's right.
And over the course of the last 75 years, we have seen that institutions have fluctuated depending on who is holding power at that point of time. Okay, and it is extremely person dependent. And a great example of that is the Election Commission, right? So
that's right.
And I think that the Election Commission, I mean, and I'm not saying that the election, I'm not a party to this narrative which says that the Election Commission has only degraded in the last 8 years. I'm absolutely not a party to this narrative. The fact is that there were many times in the past with particular people who later became Congress politicians who were chief election commissioner of this country. Okay, so the fact is, ultimately, why have institutions not developed? Institutions have not developed because of the fact that our politics has remained at a stage where institutions are seen as part of a spoil system, right? This is whatever, apna time aayega. So this is my time. Now I can put whoever I want to put, and that person better serve me. Okay, that is basically the thinking that all governments have. The reaction of civil society, unfortunately, has also been fairly myopic, which is what? Which is, let's insulate the institution from politics, right? So take the judiciary. Let's have a collegium system, okay, where judges appoint judges. Let's take what happened with the CVC and the CBI. Let's have some independent institutional mechanism. So you have this cult of a independent institution. But in my view, that is a myth. Because your institutions are only going to be as good as the people who run it, and the people are only going to be as good as the politicians you elect, and the politicians you elect are only as good as what you want to see as your manifestation in power. So ultimately, there is no magic pill which will say that, this is how to get institutions working better. Make them independent, insulate them, give them autonomy. That is not the solution. The solution is that ultimately we have to ask ourselves, as a Republican democracy, by Republican here I mean the government of the people, for the people, by the people, we have to ask ourselves, what are the kinds of people we want representing us?
That's right. As we get towards the concluding part of our discussion, there's one question which has always concerned me in the last 4 decades that I've been a journalist. One is actually, keep on talking about the fact that the constitution is for the people. But in the various protests or various agitations which the people have waged in the last several decades, it's only in the anti-CAA agitation that we actually saw for the first time that people were showing up the constitution, saying that these are the rights which are granted to us, and they are being denied by the present regime, rightly or wrongly. Their claim can be contested. But the fact is that we have seen this possibly for the first time. Would you say that despite the constitution, this is where you can also link it to the holy text discussion that we had. The people know that it is something to be kept on the shelf, but really don't understand what the Constitution gives them.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right in saying that the anti-CAA protests marked a moment when the Constitution traversed from being this holy text in the hands of lawyers and judges to being a document of the people. Okay, but it wasn't the whole Constitution; it was really the preamble. But it was
essentially the preamble.
It was a sign. It was a sign that there is something that is above government, and that is what a constitution is supposed to be. So I'm always by nature an optimist, and I think that it does mark a beginning of some kind of filtering through of those constitutional principles into sort of the general understanding of people in the country. And this might happen through protests, because protests are always the kind of at the cutting edge of government at any given
It actually
point
distills a lot of political thinking.
Or political thought, exactly, of political thought. And I think that is where it may be manifested. And I think it's also the job of people like us, lawyers, judges, to also kind of translate the legal language in which the Constitution is written for the common Indian. And I think this is a task that we must take on, because the Constitution is a legal text. It does require translation in simple language that people can understand. So maybe audios, videos, pocket books. Let's try and make this document accessible. And I think that's how we will see that not only in CAA protests, but maybe inside Parliament as well, and other debates, as in the Constitution will become a greater reference source than it is today.
Well, thank you. You said that the Constitution is a work in progress. So I think you have suggested a huge amount of work that has to be done. And among the people that you listed, the parliamentarians, lawyers, I think we in the media also have a role to play to be able to simplify this very dense, document, which people really don't understand. So it is up to us to make it actually a work in progress. Thank you so much, Arghya Sengupta, for joining on this special program on the federal.
Thank you very much.